it should come as hopefully no surprise to any of us that Christmas is just over 1 week away. The decorations are up for most of us. We've got a 9-month-old baby. Our house looks like we're Puritans. We just haven't put any decorations up. But decorations are up, meals are bought, most advent calendars are opened, often long beyond the date which they're supposed to be opened. Think about your self-control in this season as you have an advent calendar that's already fully opened with all the chocolate eaten. But you can feel, my point is, you can feel it building as it gets closer and closer. And that's true whether Christmas for you comes with a sense of joy, or as it does for some of us, it comes with a sense of dread. Whatever you feel when you think about Christmas, you can feel it getting closer and louder and brighter, and it just feels like everyone is getting ready to burst. You don't get that with any other holiday. There's no other time of year has a month-long warm-up act like Christmas does. There's no calendars for Valentine's Day. There's no carol services for Mother's Day. There's no build-up at all for International Talk Like a Pirate Day, which is this 19th of September, in case you're wondering. There's Lent for Easter, but Lent isn't really kind of like a celebratory build-up. It's a time of fasting and a time of reflection. It's not exciting. There's nothing else like Advent. Why is that? What is it that's so special about Christmas that even today, even in a society like ours that has abandoned Christianity, mostly, every year the anticipation builds and people still celebrate Advent? Well, it's because Christmas is about anticipation. It's about hope. It's about promises. If I were to have carefully prepared a lunchtime summary, which I definitely did, it would be to remind us all that Christmas is about promises that have been fulfilled and are yet to be fulfilled. Let me tell you about it. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, and verses 1 to 7. It'll be a passage that's very familiar to many of you. If you've ever been to a carol service, you've probably heard this passage. I'm afraid I don't have the page number from the church Bible, and nor am I prepared to give a prize to the first person to get it. I don't know if you've noticed, guys, but the prizes are not real prizes. So, out of integrity, I'm not going to offer one. But does anyone know what has anyone got the page number, please, for those of us to... 694, thank you. Let me read it. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he, God, humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future he will honor Galilee of the nations by way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Verse 6 of that passage is the classic Advent verse. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, is one of the passages that pretty much everyone who attends a carol service will see. Also, if you're doing a reading at a carol service, it's the passage you want, right? It's the most fun passage to read. It's the most grand passage to read. To say words like Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace, they're just much more fun to say. It's the passage you want. What I wanted to do today, though, is to dig into the passage around that verse. Because the great joy of that verse is only true when you understand what's going on around it. So Isaiah is prophesying in a particular period of Israel's history, right? This is grounded in history, this prophecy. People are living through the period that's described in the second book of... At this moment in Israel's history, God has given the people up to invaders. In 2 Kings 15:29, we get a description of what Israel is going through at this moment. In the time of the king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel-Bath-Makkah, Janoah, Kadesh, and Hazor. He took Gilead and Galilee, including all the land of Naphtali, and deported the people to Assyria. Now, there's a lot of names in there. Don't worry, we don't need to understand all of them. The two that are most important to us are Galilee and Naphtali, because these are the names that Isaiah mentions in that passage. And what's happened is the Assyrians have come into Israel and have taken their people into slavery. That's what it means. When it says deported the people to Assyria, that almost sounds like politician talk. What it means is they have kidnapped these people and taken them into slavery as spoils of war. So to be clear, this is a dark time in the history of Israel, the history of Judah. There are many, many, I'm sure, that felt like God had abandoned them. And in that darkness, this low period, this rock bottom period, we get this from the prophet. In the past, God humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan. These lands that have been conquered by the Assyrians are also lands that are going to be the source of hope going forward in the future. Which is really weird. It's especially weird if you're a first century Israelite, because you'll understand what Galilee's reputation is. Isaiah calls Galilee, Galilee of the nations. Now, in the 21st century, that sounds like a real grand title, but in the first century, the Jewish people, let me assure you, it isn't. It's derogatory. It's calling them Galilee of the nations because they are mixing with people with Gentiles, with people who are not the people of God. It's an unholy thing to be doing. Galilee has a rep, and it doesn't have a good one. They're not well regarded by other Jews, and yet Isaiah talks about them as the center point of this wonderful promise of God. The ground zero of where these promises will pour out from will be in Galilee? Surely Isaiah misspoke. He must mean Jerusalem. Obviously, the promises of God are going to be from Jerusalem. They're not going to be from Galilee. That's absurd. How could he possibly be making them? So how could he use them? In verse 3, we see what God is promising. He says, you, God, have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. There's a lot in these, so let's try and take them piece by piece, right? Isaiah has been given this amazing vision of the future. He's seen the revealed promises of God right in front of him. And what he sees is this: you have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. You could also translate enlarged the nation as you have multiplied the nation. It's referring to God's promise to Abraham back in Genesis 17. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abraham. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. The people of Israel would have thought that this promise, or may have thought, I should say, that this promise is referring to nations that already exist at this point. Ishmael's people, Esau's Edomites. But Isaiah is telling them that God's plan to enlarge and multiply Israel is not yet over. We know, particularly from the writings of Paul in Romans and Galatians, but also, frankly, from our very existence here today, that this promise is about God expanding his flock across the world and not just within the ethnically bound nation of Israel. I want you to consider, friends, whether a first century Israelite, or indeed when Isaiah was writing, back in 2 Kings, would have even considered the possibility that this promise was referring to Gentiles. That would have been that would have been odd to them, because they were the chosen nation. Would they even have considered it? Would that have been comparable to God saying to us, I'm going to expand and enlarge my kingdom to include otters? Like, would we possibly think that's what he meant? The promises are there in the Old Testament, but we read them with 21st century eyes, right? I'm not sure they would have even considered they wouldn't have considered the possibility of what God ended up doing through this promise. The second half of the promise says this: they rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. We've got two types of rejoicing going on there. Firstly, the people are rejoicing as people rejoice at the harvest. They're rejoicing at provision and at plenty. It's hard in the 21st century when food just magically appears at supermarkets. It's hard to understand the level of rejoicing that you would get for having a good harvest, because when you are living harvest to harvest, and a bad one could mean starvation, a good harvest is great cause for joy. They're rejoicing before God in the permanence of his harvest, knowing that there will be a day that they will lack for nothing. Secondly, they're rejoicing as warriors rejoice when dividing plunder. They're rejoicing in the fruits of victory, not just the rush you feel from the instant of winning, but the lasting joy that comes from defeating your enemy permanently. It is a profound sense of relief and of peace. Isaiah is saying that sense of joy, the joy in provision, the joy in victory, they are what the people are going to be feeling. And again, God is making that promise through Isaiah to a people who could not be further from provision and victory. They have been conquered and taken into slavery by their captors. This promise of God is so far away from where Israel must have felt at that moment. So how is God going to do it? Well, in verse 4, as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. That first word is important. For. The first verses, the joy, the great light, they are for this reason. Isaiah is seeing that God has shattered the yoke of the oppressors, the bar, the rod, and he's done it as profoundly as he did against Midian. Now, if your Israelite history is not fantastic, don't worry. If you don't know what that means, it's referring back to a great victory in Israel's history as described in the book of Judges. It's the story of one of the most complete victories in the history of Israel. There are 300 Israelites, many thousand Midianites. The Israelites aren't even holding weapons. They're unarmed, and they're outnumbered, and they're outgunned, and yet through the provision of God, they are able to totally and thoroughly send the Midianites packing. God is promising that kind of victory. That kind of victory for his people. And it's an apt comparison, because in the time of Gideon, the Midianites are just bullying the Israelites. Whenever Israel plants crops, the Midianites just come and take them. When the Israelites are feeling pretty hopeless, and then God comes in and he sweeps them away. He shatters the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. And in Isaiah, he promises that he's going to do it again. But he's going to go further. Because he's not just talking about one specific oppressor, he's talking about all of them. The yoke, the bar, the rod, they represent the hardships that God's people face. Yes, from specific enemies like the Midianites and the Assyrians, but also from everything else. Isaiah goes on, every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. That's a repeated theme in Isaiah. It's most clear in a famous passage that has become an idiom in English in Isaiah 2. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. God is literally promising an end to war. Not a specific war, war. In the same way, swords are beaten into plowshares because there's no need for them to be swords anymore. The clothing of warfare is going to be used as fuel for the fire because there's no need for it anymore. Because there's no more war. Ever. Stop and imagine that for a second. No war, no violence, no hatred. That's not just happening because antagonists have been defeated. That's a profound change in human nature. That's the conquering of sin. That's the end of evil. Because nothing else is going to end war, right? If the last century has taught us anything, it's there's been a number of efforts to try and make sure war never happens again, and it keeps happening again. The only thing that is going to end war is a profound change in human nature. And that's what God is promising. This is a promise of God. How's he going to do it? These few verses in Isaiah, these 150 words, they are chock full of the promises of God. They're full of earth-shattering, world-changing, history-making promises. When they're put so succinctly and feel so distant, it can be easy for us to just flick through because they feel too simple and too intangible, and so we miss them. God is promising through Isaiah to break through the wall of darkness looming over the world and to shine a great light down on us, through which he's going to reach out and cleanse us from the poison that has overtaken the world. He's promising to save Israel and through Israel save the world. These are enormous promises. How on earth is he going to do it? For to us